Chapter 8, Inner Organs of Beasts and Fowls. Inner Organs of Beasts and Fowls. From a technical standpoint, yes, Sage's Phase 2 costume included wings and jet thrusters, but to consider these effective means of flight would be total error. The engines were too weak. They had practical purposes, evasion of difficult terrain key among them, but in the current situation, hurtling headlong into an abyss, they proved frustratingly useless. First problem, she needed to right herself so the thrusters actually had a chance to slow her descent rather than propel her deeper into it. Yah! DuPage like a bathysphere jellyfish shot out the darkness, tome raised overhead. Sage twisted her body and fired her star rod. It nailed DuPage but did nothing. More importantly, the recoil lurched Sage out of DuPage's trajectory. Mostly. She hit Sage's legs, they entangled, twisted, disentangled, and launched in diverse directions. Hag cackling trailed DuPage into the mist. Yah! Said the other idiot, Lila, who plummeted near parallel to Sage. Once DuPage diverted Sage's trajectory they collided. Lila's arm latched around Sage's body, knees clamped against her hips, inextricable. The miasma obscured the ground, she would not see it until the instant prior. The howler monkey had benefits, namely ballast. Sage revolved upward slowly and once she started, strategic bursts of her thrusters quickened the process. Soon her feet pointed groundward and the thrusters started to slow her. They crackled like fireworks and spurted variegated sparks that fizzled in the mist. Her null visibility denied her frame of reference, but she imagined she slowed. She hoped she slowed. At what proved about 50% velocity they landed in a Ferris wheel car. They hit it hard and it swayed violently, until Sage disengaged her thrusters. Metal creaked. Lila unlatched and slipped into the seat beside her. Her first impression proved correct, it really was a Ferris wheel car, ascending. The miasma obscured most of the view. If she squinted, she perceived the outline of the car ahead as it crested the top, it appeared occupied. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," Lila said ad infinitum. She sagged as far as the scant legroom allowed, then straightened and threw her arm around Sage. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Her new mantra. Sage deactivated Phase 2. The wings telescoped into the pack on her back, the helmet opened and became a visor. She exhaled. They reached the apex of the Ferris wheel. "Thought I was dead for sure, fall like that'd even kill us right? Doesn't matter where's your soul gem if you splat that HHAAARGHHH. Her body thrashed spasmodically. She gripped her stomach. In a small hole under her breastplate wriggled a thin, omni-jointed creature, like a plant that lived on the ocean floor and filtered microscopic nutrients through its endless appendage. Weird, under ordinary circumstances perhaps fascinating. Usually miasmas remain too contained for truly terrifying monstrosities to emerge, but on Magnet she heard tales. Cyclopean jackanapes, horse-head amalgamations, constructs beyond physical probability or even possibility. Girls who hunted on the outskirts of Los Angeles had the best encounters. The city chewed girls to pieces. 3 years ago Sage attempted an exhaustive bestiary of wraith forms. She envisioned an online encyclopedia editable by anyone, a databank of knowledge and a guide, a route to grow past her own demise. A lot of files in a folder somewhere. She plucked the tapeworm out Lila's stomach and flung it over the side. Welcome to overtime, the part that should never exist. Collins would appreciate the football metaphor. Sage rubbed her temples and tried to cohere.
On, uck,
said Lila.
Jesus, fuck, shit.
And so on. And so on, and so on. The pass had been interfered. Pass interference. No completion. The game continued. They declined the Ferris wheel.
Why the hell's there a Ferris wheel?
Lila finally said after she stopped swearing.
How long have you been a magical girl? 7 or 8 months. 7 months actually. Miasma corrupt the environment. They create things that don't exist, even things that shouldn't exist. It's normal.
Check it out in the Encyclopedia Magicis, if only it existed. Maybe they'd find one in the miasma, ihaha.
We gotta get out then, right? Right? We can't stay. Please tell me you're more sane than Clown Muffle. Please please please.
Sage said nothing a long time. As they drew groundward, surroundings became visible. A long carnival fairway, lined with tents and shops, games, and rides, none staffed but all active. Honestly, she could beat DuPage. DuPage was not so great. For all the hype of the 4 Centurions, their best was nothing special. Invulnerability was her most pernicious aspect, but not insurmountable. Even minus Aurora, Sage's Phase 3 could overcome damage negation. Even her terminally sad head considered it a distinct possibility, and the foolish, traitorous hope had kept her stupid soul gem aflame since the get-go. It became so easy to imagine outcomes. Overtime might be a stultified, elongated, past its prime game. The spectators might all check their watches in unison, half or 3/4 might stand and leave. But one team won. Victory still existed, in fact drew closer than ever before. The flame of ambition had not died utterly within her. Of course not. She'd have vanished in that bathroom otherwise, long before Collins came with the news about Minneapolis.
No. No, I see that fucking glint in your eye, no. Please let's leave, please let's escape. Please.
Yeah. She fumbled her brain out of her skull, and 20 massive men in helmets dogpiled atop it. That frustrating, idiotic hope, the one thing that stopped her from just dying already.
Yeah. You're right. Girls in search of grief cubes will come in droves soon enough. If Collins doesn't make it happen, Cube will. He's got a bit of an efficiency bent, doesn't he?
She forced a smile. Poking fun at Cube always broke tension with unfamiliar girls. She used the technique on Magnet. Girls from all lifestyles, rich girls, poor girls, girls who weren't even interested in the whole magical girl aesthetic, girls who hadn't seen a magical girl anime and who had only the barest conception of a Sailor Moon. Even those girls grinned when someone else acknowledged the inhumanity of their mutual employer, which normally unnerved them so.
Ha, yeah,
said Lila. Lila, Sage decided, didn't deserve to die.
All right, we're almost to the bottom. Prepare to fight. Do you have a weapon?
Lila patted her body, scooched over and bent her back to see her hip. She pulled from under an armored panel a handgun.
I forget how many bullets I have. Enchanted. Yeah. If I shoot you with it, it'll heal you.
Whether Lila deserved to die or not, Sage didn't know to trust that particular statement. If she saw the pistol aimed her way, unless circumstance compelled her to accept, she would evade.
I'll take the lead. Stay close. Yeah.
The jingling of small metal components signaled the final arc of their descent as the landing area became visible. Sage raised her star rod, but while plenty of figures had gathered at the base of the Ferris wheel, she detected no more than a handful of wraiths. The figures were human. Men, women, children, elders, their faces reposed into that same blankness, mouths half agape as they gently swayed in their respective spaces. The cart reached the bottom and the door opened. Sage and Lila stepped out, still braced for an attack, but the only figures that moved were a young man and woman who, holding hands, climbed into the now vacant cart. The few wraiths present did not rear up to strike, instead, they lurked behind the human bodies and opened what served as their mouths to suck a transient quintessence from the senseless brains.
Shit!
Sage rushed into the crowd. She would hurt people if she used her meteors, but she could still cut with the five-pointed star. The wraiths, cognizant of her attack, turned from their prey, but her agility proved more than enough to overwhelm. Soon the area was clear. 2 new humans stepped into the next cart.
This many people were in the park this late,
said Lila. Sage seized Lila's wrist and dragged her into the main thoroughfare. Calliope music crinkled, played upon a gramophone in some unseen enclosure, while lights blazed on either side of the path in 2 directions unto the end of their field of vision. Both ways meandered more people, more glassy eyes, more faceless expressions, more mothers and fathers herding progeny, more night crawlers caught on street corners by the encroaching mist and hypnotized deeper along, more 9-to-5ers woken in the night and compelled to wander downstairs, white faces and black faces both, faces from both sides of the river, the gentrified downtown and the industrial Illinois side fringe.
No,
she said.
It's spread far beyond the park.
More faces drew out of the mist. This was insane. She had never seen a miasma like this. They would appear in small, localized areas, usually based around a cadre of 4 or 5 wraiths, maybe one stronger wraith. A floor of a housing tenement, a wing of a hospital, an alley behind a brothel. This was cataclysmic. This was the whole fucking city swallowed. How would the human world frame the aftermath? Unprecedented mass suicide? Neurochemical terrorist weapon? Or would Kyubey simply erase the memories of the whole world? Could he do that? Everyone knew he erased human memories when they noticed something inconvenient. But on that scale? Would it even be logistically feasible? Even taking only her own geography of familiarity into consideration, the United States and Canada, if one assumed a number of Kyubey bodies equivalent to the number of active magical girls, well, sometimes Kyubey bodies died, so he must have backups. Assuming twice the number of Kyubey bodies as the number of active magical girls, her last estimate being somewhere around 3,000 failing to include vagrants, who drifted between tiny towns and were notoriously uncountable, so let's assume 6,000 active magical girls and 12,000 Kyubey bodies, these being very rough estimates. Even with that in mind, you're looking at something like, let's say 400 million ordinary humans, divide by the number of Kyubey bodies and it looks like 30,000 or so humans per Kyubey. But consider also that the geographic distribution of Kyubey bodies is uneven, and what of the innumerable small towns? Did Kyubey have a body in every farming outpost in North Dakota? The problem became too complex for her to figure, but she assumed it an impossible undertaking for Kyubey to erase the memories of every human on a scale this large in this mass media sensationalism era. But why she allowed herself to fall into such a pit thinking about it she did not know.
I can see it. On your face,
said Lila.
You're gonna stay and try to save them.
Whatever had been on Sage's face, that certainly wasn't it, but once the suggestion arose she found any alternative impossible.
Yes. I'm sorry. I won't pressure you to follow me. In fact, I'll even escort you to the exit. It'll be good for me to see how far it's spread anyway.
Visible relief appeared on Lila's face. And, as though it was something she had been thinking about all along but only decided to bring up once she knew it wouldn't affect her,
what about the quiet chick? Quiet chick. You know. Hair eater.
Aurora. But quiet chick? Aurora wasn't a chatterbox like Collins, but she wasn't shy either. Had she given Lila that impression? Weird, but it didn't matter.
She's strong and has a cool head in a crisis. I'm sure she survived the fall. The wraiths are more docile now that they have food, so she must still be alive.
Sage also still had the necklace of ice that kept her severed head on her shoulders. Her natural regeneration had healed her by now, so she no longer needed it and paused in conversation to cut it off with her star rod, taking especially care to make the minimum number of cuts necessary. After she dropped the ice to the ground, she continued.
I'll find her. But let's get you out first. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They traveled down the thoroughfare in the best approximation of toward the exit Sage could reckon based on vague trajectories, relative positioning of the arch, which remained visible despite impaired visibility, and guesswork. They kept on guard, but Sage only had to deal with a smattering of wraiths here and there. The tide of people shielded them from direct assault. Roller coasters, entertainers in animal costumes with sickly mange fur, signs an expressive old-timey typeface and a language Sage figured as German. Posters with odd imagery. They saw one of a small boy chased by a swarm of bees and a rabid dog in a pumpkin patch. And all these people. Shit. Sage's own despair became a fleck in the face of what she saw. A seething sense of loathing filled her gut, aimed toward her melodrama, her inability to cope with a single death, her constant tug of wayward emotions. Spiteful sobriety settled upon her. As they walked, her anger spread, it bubbled over the brim of her too small goblet and flowed to the next available target, Lila, whose cowardice suddenly peeved her beyond compare. Such was the capriciousness of Sage's moods. She could witness her own petulance in real time, almost as a disembodied observer who hovered over her body's shoulder, and yet she was powerless to stop it. She opened her mouth to snap at Lila, demand to know how she dared flee rather than help a single person, but before she had the chance to speak, Lila said,
"You maybe wouldn't be such a bad boss."
She meant it, too. Granted, her initial assessment of Denver had been starkly negative. The girl wanted to take on literally invincible DuPage, but shit, it almost worked. And now she would not only let Lila leave, but help her escape? Had humanity still a few saints left? Forgive the melodrama, but only her omnipresent terror of the miasma kept her from a wellspring of tears. She dwelled upon the maddened mix of moments from the past, however long it had been, 30 minutes or 3 hours, the times where certainty of impending demise appeared irrevocable. Then this generous, kind, loving woman, this Denver, every bit the idol her stupid forum presented her. In a froth of DuPages, clown muffles, and of course Auroras, she glimmered, fucking glimmered, a beacon of sanity and compassion. God, she fucking loved her. Fuck. Denver's pause, stilted, like compliments came foreign to her, finally ended.
You think? Yeah. You have a fucking brain. You have a bit of a soul.
A laugh.
You're saying that because I'm helping you escape. You're nicer to me than my ostensible allies. You say you'll do something nuts, but you actually have a plan. I dunno. Always figured based on your online persona you would be a total bitch. Jesus, don't listen to me babble right now, I'm fucking giddy.
She figured she ought to shut up before the emotions bubbled up so strong inside she lost all sense of herself. She had to remember she was not safe yet, the miasma still surrounded her. Sure, the wraiths had thinned, had a lot of brain-dead cattle to feast on. Sure, Denver seemed more than apt enough to take down what remnants they encountered, at that exact moment darting between the lines to kill a quick couple with her wand, but Hedgewish had to remain focused. Yes. Had to keep it together. How stupid, and yet how classic would it be for her to die at that exact moment, so close to safety. In a movie, she'd be the unlikable side character, the loser who would rather run than help anyone. She had no delusions of her dubious position on the moral compass. To some extent she had to believe in karma. After all, she had absolute certainty of God's existence, but it always made her mad, watching some horror movie, seeing some coward make the rational decision to run like hell and not simply die but get gleefully, spitefully eviscerated. As though the monster were the hero and the coward the true villain. Denver returned, wand on shoulder.
I'm not a great leader. We're all a bunch of teenage girls, none of us are George Washington. That's where everyone's going wrong. They get these pretensions of grandeur. I mean, maybe you're like that too. But the people I know.
Denver started to tremble, her arms bent at slight but rigid angles, and Hedwig's voice trailed off as she became sensible to some sort of nerve struck. Damn, how many times did she need to tell herself to cool down and not muck things up? The more words she spoke, the higher chance one of them offended her benefactor. She struggled to twist herself back into that Chicago mindset, silence around certain people, deferential head bows only.
I've made some errors,
said Denver. And who knew what monologue that might have segued into, what deluge of pent-up mistakes spilled from the mouth of a veteran 5 or so years running, had not a lacquered glint spread at the furthest reach of their vision, a glassy sheen only perceptible thanks to the rows of light bulbs in the carnival stands. It looked like ice. Denver wasn't looking anywhere toward it. She opened her mouth and stumbled on her first word, coincidentally that word being
Aurora,
with undue pause between each syllable and issued in a raspy whisper, so for an instant Hedwig wondered whether to alert her. Perhaps if she said nothing they would continue unhindered until they reached the exit. But she remembered the horror movie coward obliterated on the end of the killer's machete. She pointed over Denver's shoulder.
It's her.
Denver swallowed her whisper and looked.
That's close,
she said, then dashed off the thoroughfare and past the tents into the rows of barren trees toward the shimmer of ice. Hedwig lacked options but to follow. The lip of ice was further from the road than she first thought. They ran through black wood interspersed with flaps of circus tent. At one point the tent ruffled and a marching band of clowns tumbled out, literally tumbling, rolling and bouncing between the trees with their tubas and trombones. They did not seem dangerous, they were not wraiths. Denver threaded between them and Hedwig tried to. One sprung into her and knocked her over. A moment's panic resolved when she kicked herself away and the clowns kept marching harmlessly. Aurora, Denver broadcast telepathically. Aurora, where are you? They followed a trail of crystallized bark. Aurora's ice thawed in long ribbons from the branches. Hedwig's stellar mood hadn't yet died, but as she glanced over her shoulder and no longer saw the thoroughfare, the strips of tent canvas grew grayer and tattered, indistinct forms moved within, shuffling creatures upon supine bodies. The traces of dirty white hands, some fingers twitching while others remained still. Darker bodies disappeared entirely. When Hedwig held up her own hand she could barely see it. Denver glimmered ahead, though, something effervescent. So Hedwig followed.
Oh God, there you are,
said Denver at one point. They entered a clearing, or less a clearing, more an area cleared for some Wiccan ritual, with deliberate assortments of stones and sticks. What canvas remained was half buried, as was an overturned steeplechase pony. A human-sized statue of a masked squirrel character with a wide toothless grin lingered at the fringe. In the center, on a flat rock, sat Denver's Aurora, one finger tapped ponderously against her forehead while her other spooled hair into her mouth.
You're okay. That's good. I won't have to waste time looking for you,
said Denver upon approach. Hedwig, winded from the jog, leaned against a tree on the rim of the clearing and scratched at her stump, which started to itch. Chicago had plenty of healers strong enough to make her a new arm, then again, Denver probably did too. Of course, in Denver they would expect her to fight wraiths on a daily basis. But maybe they had a system like in Chicago, where they paired girls up for safety and expediency. Not that the girl Denver had extended an invitation. No need to get ahead of herself. But Hedgewish had to consider her future plans. Who knew why the Empress sent Hedgewish to St. Louis, but to do so knowing full well DuPage's power meant she surely esteemed Hedgewish's life little. If she crawled back on her belly, would they even accept her? Would the Empress say,
"Well, so much for the informal execution. Guess we'll do it the old-fashioned way.
Inject liberal these, thous, and eths." At the same time, she had zero idea why the Empress would want her dead. The Empress frankly drooled over her stupid classified wish that wasn't even that interesting, was in fact a point of utter embarrassment, like if she signed away her soul to White Rabbit Satan, sure, but doing it for a reason so god-awful as hers. Regardless, she needed to consider where she wanted to go after this mess. Now that she actually had the luxury to think of an after.
"Did you see DuPage anywhere?"
Denver asked. Aurora shrugged. Hedgewish wondered, vaguely but with little interest, why the eyes had led away from the lights and thoroughfare. Before she dwelled on that point, objects amid the deeper trees caught her eye: 5 dark men, hanged.
"Yeah, well, reunion complete, can we get back to the mission of getting me out of here?"
Denver acted as though she hadn't heard and pressed Aurora further.
"Hello? Aurora, are you there? Can you speak? Answer me, did you see DuPage?"
She moved up to Aurora and waved her hands around. Aurora only chewed her hair and flitted her eyes between Denver and Hedgewish. Was she so committed to silence? Hedgewish thought she heard her talk once, over the phone, but she was distant and muffled. Maybe it had been someone else. Hedgewish became aware of the sudden gap between her and Denver, Denver in the center of the circle, Hedgewish still at its outskirts, and braved her unease of the voodoo cult witchcraft to step inside. Which, like clockwork, of course, like it was nothing but her presence that spurred it, like nothing in this world mattered save the infinite and eternal fucking over of Lila Chatterjee. The ground parted and she slid along a chute of dirt toward the face of a mammoth wraith. She recognized it as the Lamia wraith from which Clown Muffle previously saved her. Lurking underground all this time, maybe it knew her scent or the particular tremor of her footsteps. Despite the ineffable horror locked in her throat, she failed to scream, despite the belated realization that Denver and Aurora might remain trapped in their 50% dumb show and not even realize the ground swallowed her up. She made no noise. The soil funneled her toward the maw. A hand clapped her wrist and wrenched her back as the fly-trap tendril teeth snapped shut close enough to shear the sole off her shoe. Denver, with better reflexes than Hedgewish anticipated, but fuck did she appreciate them, flung her from the center of the widening pit and danced back herself as the entire clearing stirred in a vortex of ashen dirt. The tail uncoiled from the clearing's edge and rose in a gargantuan twist. Hedgewish landed on her back and Crab walked backward fast as she could. Denver whipped her wand about and summoned a bunch of meteors from the sky that rained down with unbelievable slowness, the slowest meteors in fucking history. They were so slow Hedgewish could dodge them. Not that she had a chance, because around her curled the Lamia's fingers, likewise slow. But when she tried to push herself up and jump away from them, she found herself pushing with her arm that did not exist. The fingers clamped around her body and she lost all capacity for breath. Her back bent inward and her legs writhed in what space remained as a futile instinct initiated to defend the gem just above her knee. She shuffled every inch of movable body to make even the tiniest pocket of free space for it, and even then it wasn't enough. She managed to tuck the knee into the back of her other one, so at least her gem pressed only against her, not quite rock solid, bicep, but the fingers continued to constrain and constrain and constrain and constrain until the blood dribbled down her nose and lip and her eyes reeled and her vision swam. She became dimly cognizant of Denver whacking the fingers with her wand as around her burst explosion upon explosion of space rock against pseudo-reptile scales. Denver beat the fingers hard enough for them to loosen and then tried to drag Hedgewish out by gripping her head, which only achieved the impression that Hedgewish's head would come off. It didn't, though. Denver's hands fell away.
Shit. Fuck.
Dangling above, trapped in the coil of the snake tail's tip, was Aurora. Her arms were bound while her legs kicked uselessly. Fucking hell, only Hedgewish was allowed to be the useless bitch of the group. If everyone did it then they all fucking died now, didn't they? She sought Denver's expression, tried to figure it in these crucial instants between the posing of a problem and the attempt to solve it. Logically, the best decision would be to kill the fucking wraith and free them both when it died, but given apparently a full barrage of meteors did squat to it, maybe not. In that case, the best option became to free Aurora first, because Aurora could actually do things, but in the time it took, what would become of Hedgewish? How did Aurora even get captured when she could make giant fucking ice walls? The pressure on Hedgewish's body mounted. That karmic cycle, That horror movie coward crushed with extreme prejudice? Denver stood still milliseconds longer than she should have. She glanced from one helpless idiot to the next, and then she swung her star wand into the Lamia's finger. It didn't sever it, the Lamia was too big and bulky, but it cut a decent chunk, and then she swung again and again lumberjack style until the finger dangled by a thread of grey, not exactly skin, material, and Hedgewish could heave a massive breath.
Fuck 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 fuck,
streamed from Denver's mouth as she went to work on the second finger. Halfway through she gave up or got indecisive and seized Hedgewish's torso to tug and kick against what fingers remained, which clamped even harder in retribution of those lost. She squeezed through and out with a pop on top of Denver as they rolled back. Denver kicked Hedgewish off her as fast as possible and searched the sky to see where Aurora had gone. Any semblance of the clearing was eradicated, everywhere around them were churning coils. Hedgewish looked for an exit and found none, so instead she got as close to Denver as possible, only for Denver to leap onto a bend in the tail and run along its scaly spine toward the dangling, dancing Aurora. The Lamia's hands swept toward Hedgewish and she jumped after Denver to avoid it. Along the undulating surface of tail she wobbled, hobbled, and tried desperately not to fall. The coils chafed together in thick rings and it looked like if someone fell they would get sucked between and not come back. The moment Denver got close to Aurora the tail flicked, the coils reassembled, and Aurora was somewhere completely different. Denver kicked a scale and whipped her wand again. More comets burst from a split sky, but instead of waiting for them to fall she jumped between them, her foot never more than an instant against their flaming surfaces, and Hedgewish knew she had no hope to follow. The snake shuffled beneath her and she tripped. She gripped the spine with both legs and prayed not to fall off or get crushed. Idiot! Screamed her dumb head. Should have made a break for the exit when she had the chance. The moment they left the thoroughfare she should have known. Why had her instincts, which she considered so good, failed her? That was the whole damn problem with leaders. They promise what you want and lead you into the fuck realm. A tree branch slapped her face and knocked her back. She fought to hold on to something as the snake's body slithered from under her, but she failed to fall. The branches snagged the shirt under her armor and held her suspended. Across what once was the clearing Denver reached Aurora. She landed on the snake's tail and pummeled it with her wand. Sand streamed from the gashes, a gush nearly swept her away, but she held firm and hit harder. Aurora meanwhile betrayed no terror whatsoever at her predicament. Girl looked 12 and she wasn't bawling. Hedgewish never understood anyone other than herself. The coils of snake parted. From their midst rose the head and torso of the lamia, head tilted back and streaming strands of dry cracked hair. The constant shuffle of scales against scales, a sound of which Hedwig had not been aware before, stopped. Everything fell still and silent, and she beheld it all, the mammoth serpent, the immense torso, the endless flicker where the eyes should be, and a sullen sadness in the wormwood husk of Hedwig's insides, a fear projected into her. What a horrid world! The kind of feeling that plunged her into the depths of wrist-cutter poetry, an idea that all living beings were inherently depraved and barbaric, a cannibalistic society clung together by a veneer of ragged smiles, all that shit. The kind of shit she never thought twice about, because she could smile same as any other and knew when to scurry sideways. It all became a hard-boiled growth inside her. And who better than her knew? Who better than the sole person alive aware of God's existence, not merely an object of faith or words scrawled in a text, an actual witness to her glories, who could even place a name to her face, Madoka Kaname? Even that awareness only deepened this pang of despair. Because God existed and was good and wanted only good, but even she lacked the power to instill good as a fixture of humanity, and despite her best effort, her most powerful gambit to eradicate evil had only managed to swap one form of evil for one other. God was weak. What were they, ants? The lamia opened her mouth, dangled the tip of her tail above it, and released Aurora. Denver swept a hand to catch her, but either she missed or she slipped, or Aurora flailed her own hand in the wrong direction. The hands did not connect. Aurora plunged into the lamia's open mouth, her gold hair flashed against the non-light, and she disappeared. The mouth closed. The comets Denver summoned earlier hit the snake's body in one microcosmic apocalypse. All Hedwig's vision swelled with flame, and the force snapped the branch that suspended her. By the time she hit the ground, the flare subsided and the snake had already, howling and hissing, halfway sunk back into the soil. Denver's second barrage had scalded it, scorches spread across its scales, and although Denver herself landed on its forehead and pounded her wand against it, nothing she did roused its attention away from its intended goal of sinking. It had its morsel, it lacked a reason to stick around. Or it calculated its odds of survival against a bloodlust Denver lower than normal. It appeared one of the comets had struck its throat, for a particularly insidious burn spread there. Whatever the reason, it descended, and fast, and soon all its tail disappeared, and only its head remained, and finally its forehead sank, and Denver had to stop striking and leap off to avoid being sucked down too. The soil closed and the wraith was gone. So was Aurora. Hedwig tried to hold herself in. She barely knew Aurora. Who even was she? A duplicate. Hedwig had to forget it, not think about it, pretend it didn't happen. Someone had to remain sane, because if she verged so close to hysterical, how would Denver feel? But Denver's expression was unreadable. She stared at the spot a long time and held her wand limp at her side. She wiped grime off her face. That stupid sense of sorrow remained, mingled with the omnipresent plotting, scheming, wondering. What would Denver's mindset be now? How would she react? Would she go ballistic? Would Hedwig need to console her? She was fucking bad at that. The prime goal had to remain, escape the miasma. She had to somehow goad Denver that way. Fuck, and if Denver wanted revenge? To hunt down the snake? What then? But Denver swiveled, strode, and passed Hedwig. She muttered.
That's who I am as a leader. We. Aurora,
she whispered. End of chapter. Chapter end.